this is like, this would be like when you've been dealt a 7 or an 8, I reckon. You know what I mean? Like in the middle of the pack.
Oh, it's a tough one.
I'm going to go higher. Higher.
Correct.
Yay!
Correct.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Undocked. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Raal. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very good. I suspect I'm slightly sort of more, how can I put it, less drained than you. Although I had a very early start this morning. I'm working with some charming people out in Manila and India, which means I'm sort of having very early
On calls at 6 a.m.
pre cornflakes, pre cornflake meetings. But nice. It's good. It's got, you get a lot done before lunchtime and stuff. But you were doing a webinar this morning, which I couldn't, because I had my meetings. I couldn't come in, but I thought it looked fascinating. So tell us about that.
We've just wrapped up in the last sort of half hour or so. It was great fun. It was all about using AI to improve the commercial performance of ships. So this is kind of a part of the new digital ship, is that what we want to do is bring a ship owner, ship operator, and a technology supplier on and have just like a really frank and honest conversation about what works, what doesn't. We had exactly that over the last hour. It was really interesting. Thank you to the 200 or so people who tuned in live to watch us stream on YouTube. If you want, I'll give you the kind of summary of everything that was said. So we had Niels Israelson, who is the general manager of commercial operations at Stena Bulk. We had Alex Lapointe, who's the chief product officer at Orbit MI, and Felix Jan van den Bos, who's a sort of digital transformation expert that gets parachuted into various industrial companies. But he's done a lot of work with charterers over the last few years to run digital transformation projects. And to condense a full hour into 30 seconds for you, because I'm nice like that, save you the time. The three things I came up with was start with the problems. Everyone, right? The CEO goes to a conference and hears about AI, or you open up any of the mainstream press and you hear about AI, the world is changing, things are moving very, very fast, and they think, oh, wow, we need to do something with AI. But what exactly? And actually a big thing that came across from all three of them was, if you don't just start with a really clear problem set that you're trying to solve, then you can chuck time, money, effort, energy at all of this and end up going nowhere, or have some very, very pretty, innovation theatre. So that was kind of the first fundamental. Second was actually look for tools. So consider artificial intelligence as being just one tool in a toolbox. And when you've got your problems identified, actually sit down and ask the question, is AI the answer? And can we do this with a more simple technology? Can we do this with a less experimental technology? Can we do this with a cheaper technology? Do we have to use artificial intelligence to make this work? And if the answer is yes, then you can start to look at what types of AI to use and what tools to draw down. And then the third was, in any large organization, if you're trying to make get the kind of user adoption going, is identify champions in the organization early on. So recognizing that there's a bit of a fear factor around this stuff, and, you can open the papers one day and it'll be that robots are going to take over the world and will be some sort of, we've talked about this in the past, some sort of subservient human race to our AI overlords. What they're effectively saying is recognize that fear factor, find the people in the organization who've overcome it already just because they're interested and curious in the technology, and then get them to sit down with everyone individually through the organization, sometimes just one-on-one, and just show what's possible with the tools. And if you can do those three things, you have a much higher likelihood of success. So there's a couple of other bits, but I'll just get your initial thoughts on that.
Today's episode is brought to you by Sedna. Many technology platforms in trade push companies into closed systems, dictating how work gets done and limiting the tools you can use. The result? Less flexibility, slower innovation, and workflows shaped by the vendor instead of the business. Sedna takes a different approach. With Sedna Connect, organizations have the freedom to integrate the systems they already rely on or build their own custom solutions through an open API. One platform, one version, endless flexibility. Sedna doesn't force lock-in. Instead, it empowers businesses, developers, and partners to shape workflows their own way. With Sedna, control stays where it belongs, with the customer. Explore Sedna Connect at sedna.com. Yeah, No, it sounds interesting and a good. I particularly like lineup, so I will, even though you're telling me all the highlights, I will watch it myself. But yeah, I mean, let's work with them in order. So, I mean, the first one there, when you're talking about that problem, I think that is so important, and it's really, really frustrating, even as a sort of a technologist, as working in technology for a large part of my career. People starting with the kind of the end, if you know what I mean, and kind of saying, right, we
Yeah.
need to be using this. And it's one of those things that in the training world, for example, it's really hard to resist sometimes, because you look at technology as an obvious benefit, so therefore it must be a good thing to use. But if you started it from that end, you're always going to screw up, because I've done it. I've started from saying, oh, we must use so and so, that's a really good tool, and then you're sort of trying to nail in, training is a classic one, then you're sort of really struggling to align learning outcomes and things like that in there. But there's lots and lots of examples of that. And I think we talked a little bit before about why AI is different, and why we end up sort of, having, as I've got a couple of things to raise today. There's a lot of sort of ethical dimensions, it seems, to AI. And one of those things is because it's kind of treading in very human sort of waters. And I think we've talked about this between us, and I don't really know if I've landed anywhere. I kind of tend to sort of swing a little bit between thinking that you need separate AI strategy from having just a general technology strategy which includes AI.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
when you're talking about the solving of the problem domain and the deployment of technology, I'm 100% in the latter camp. I'm there thinking about, like, absolutely, there's probably easier, better ways and more governable ways, and easier to kind of, and probably less environmentally damaging, as I've got a couple of things to point out on that front later. And so, yeah, 100% on that. When you get to your third point, when you're talking about the champions piece, that's when I start to sort of then, gravitate a little bit more to thinking about the dimensions of why AI is different. But I think we talked about it in terms of last week, when we were talking about tech stress and tech overloading people with new technologies and stuff like that. For me, that champions piece is really excellent advice. But I would also broaden that myself and say, any kind of deployment of technology really should be thought about through the change management lens. And a really good part of that, big part of that, is communication. Now, I talked about last week the struggles sometimes with published material. We're going to tell everyone about it at the town hall, and then we're going to put a post on the internet
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I'm going to, kind of, talk about it on LinkedIn as well, on the employing channels and stuff like that. You'd be amazed how many times you can think you've done that job and then it sort of fails, versus using something like those champions that you mentioned to be bringing that into the workplace in a totally different way, in a way that's kind of decorporatized and it's much more, it allows for much more discourse, and it can be examined and stuff in a completely different way by employees. So I think that's really sort of solid and good advice. And I think that the other thing as well is that what's that old adage that's really good? It's like, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
Yeah.
That is a well-worn trope, but it's kind of, it's an important one as well. You can sometimes limit yourself, but with the technology, by starting by saying we must, find a use for this technology in our
Yeah.
business. The other thing that's difficult, though, and I think this is one of the things that we've definitely talked about when we talked about some of the ways in which AI was eating up budgets and potentially taking away, because that was coming from the boardroom and from investors and things like that. They are approaching companies and saying, you should be saving money with AI. All the guys at the golf club, tell me this. I went to this dinner the other night and people were telling me about all the savings of AI. So you should be using AI. And that is where it's going to be difficult for leaders in any business that want to take the kind of sensible advice that you're giving there, because they are going to be challenged by people who have already said the answer is AI.
Yeah. 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 And
Yeah.
I think you do have to consider the vested interest, right? That some people, not some people, many people have now in AI in some way, shape, or form, right? At the highest structural level, you think about the amount of money that the likes of Microsoft has put into AI over the last 3 to 5 years. That goes all the way down through investment that's being made into infrastructure, investment that's being made into software tools, investment that's being made into teams. I think we talked a little bit a few weeks ago about the just extortionate sums of money that really good AI scientists and researchers are being given as their signing bonuses to join either OpenAI or join Meta. And I think when you take that, you kind of have to realize that actually there's so much money going into this that everyone needs to see a return. And
Yep.
therefore, everyone is being encouraged to chase this new shiny thing because the people who put the money at the top need to see that spend come up. So
Yeah.
I think one of the things I've always liked about shipping is that I think the industry is full of very, very shrewd technology buyers, and they like to see technology that works.
Mm.
And I think, so often maritime doesn't get caught up in bubbles in quite the same way, maybe with a few exceptions kind of around the dot-com bubble, but doesn't get caught up in quite the same way that perhaps other technology sectors do, which isn't a bad thing.
100%. I 100% agree. And I think that, there is a welcome cynicism in maritime towards which can be very frustrating when you're convinced you've got the right technology and the right solution and stuff like that. But you do see that people are quite reluctant to unseat existing suppliers, even if they're not 100%
Yeah.
happy. They tend to kind of take a long view and they're a sensible kind of approach to it, because I think they understand they can be a actually very understanding and very unfickle audience, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. The savviness of the buyers, and I think also as well, because we've always had that sort of bit of a lag. I think the joy of being in maritime is that sometimes you can see this kind of sugar rush goes on in the main industries, and then by the time it kind of gets to maritime, some of the sort of kinks and the or the emperor's new clothes moments have sort of been
Yeah. Yeah.
unearthed, and we see it there. But I want to come to your point about the too big to fail thing, because I think it's well, you didn't use those words, but that's what went through my head when you were saying it. I don't know. I don't know that we could pull some statistics from this if we had um, if we'd have had a bit more preparation. But I think that there's fairly robust kind of evidence that AI is actually propping up the American economy at the moment as far as any kind of growth goes.
Certainly, I think when you look at the S&P 500 over the last 3 to 5 years, I will get this wrong, so I will paraphrase it, but something like 80-90% of the growth in value of the S&P 500 has been the top 5 of
Mm.
the S&P 500, and that is big tech. So
Yeah.
I think it's something like that. That's probably slightly wrong, but I think to your point, it's directionally correct.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's not our job to come up with all the facts. We're too busy just riffing. But I think it's I think that is something I've heard from multiple sort of sources, and that's a big worry, because I think what that starts to do is it starts to um, undermine your confidence in governance, right? And so this is something that I knew you were running the webinar today, and I'm sure there were lots of really good positive learnings from it. But I have a particular interest at the moment, and particularly this week, because there are a couple of things that sort of occurred to me in the course of the week, articles I was reading, of what sort of happens when you get something like AI, which is, and for reasons that I'll sort of describe, the governance is poor, comes into contact with high compliance environments, as we're seeing in shipping. And I think, and it's not just shipping, by the way, there's a lot of areas where you would want to have an exercise similar caution, but clearly this is a maritime transformation show. We've got a lot of listeners and a lot of the companies that you and I work with who are looking at investing and clearly see that there are big benefits to it. But I was drawn to an article today. Sorry, not today. I read it. I think it was yesterday. That was published in the Guardian, and I immediately thought, like, oh right, this is really good. The Guardian, British newspaper. If you're not aware, we'll put the link in because it's a really good read. It's really well written. It's a great example of good, well-researched journalism, and it does it in a very creative way. So it takes the train, the writer takes the train down from San Francisco down to Los Angeles. And I won't try and kind of take you through it. You can read the article for yourself. But what it really does is it starts to talk about what's going on there in terms of, first and foremost, this enormous race and escalation that's going on. And there's a number of points that it makes in the article that I think are worthy of discussion. And I'd like to get, your perspective on them as well. And I think they are concerning. And I think it's this governance worry, which comes from the place that you're talking about. And I don't want to get too dystopic. We are supposed to be entertaining people, but there are a few kind of dangerous parallels that I think are worthy of bringing people's attention in seeing as we're working in a high compliance environment. So the first one is the money you mentioned there. So I know I'm actually made some notes today. I'm changing as I mature, as we get more subscribers. So the more subscribers, the more fact-based I become. It's worth me checking.
If you want Raal to actually prepare for these sessions, then please subscribe.
Yes, do. Yeah. Trillions on the table. So the VCs doubled AI bets last year. Citigroup now forecast 2.8 trillion in AI data center spend by 2030, more than the annual GDP of Canada, Italy, or Brazil, while Nvidia's valuation has hit 4.3 trillion. I think they're the first company to hit that. Nvidia are obviously making the chips, which are so important to that, right? So where I don't want to, well, I'm going to say it, wherever there's these big money, a lot of that buys you a lot of clout, right? In terms of it's hard to stand up to big money in that way. The other thing is that everybody's chasing this AGI. Are you familiar with the expression, the AGI?
I am, but for the benefit of our audience, please do expand on it. Or do you want me to?
No, well, yeah, I've been talking for ages, so you tell us what it is.
Okay. AGI is effectively, well, it's not effectively, it stands for Artificial General Intelligence, right? So if we wind the clock back on AI a little bit, we had something called a reactive machine, which is where you could give it a very limited focus. So it could be something like a chess game. And within the bounds of the chess game, there's a limited number of moves you can make. There's a limited number of rules. It's able to learn those rules, learn those moves by playing over and over and over again. And it got to the point back in the late 60s, early 70s that you could beat any human at chess. But if you put checkers in front of that machine, it would be totally clueless. And so as AI has progressed and as compute power has progressed, the ability of any individual AI system to look at a wider range of issues has got wider and wider and wider. And AGI is, I would describe it more as a point in time where a machine, a computer system could beat a human in any topic. So any individual topic where you could get the world's leading expert on that topic and put them toe to toe with a computer, and the computer would win. And at that point, it is seen as almost a kind of jumping off point, an unknown point where AI effectively becomes more intelligent than humanity as a collective. And we don't really know what happens next. It could lead to the apocalypse and we could all end up as a subservient race, or it could just lead to the fact that none of us have to do any real work and we become, a sort of leisure race, or somewhere in between. No one really knows. And so there are people on both sides of that debate. There's a kind of acceleration camp who are saying we need to do this as fast as we possibly can and get to AGI, and OpenAI and Meta and a few of the other big tech companies are very much in that camp and are working towards it proactively. There's stated mission of OpenAI. And then there are people in the kind of decel camp, the deaccelerating camp, where they actually think, well, we need to slow down, we need governance, we need checks on this stuff. We can't let an AGI system kind of out in the wild because it could actually end humanity. So that's my take on AGI, at least.
Well, that was it. Thank you. That was very, very comprehensive. I was just going to say it's general. I was just going to give a definition, basically.
Sorry.
No. It's good. It's good. We will come back to those points that you made in there. But yeah, I thought it was because I hadn't really come across it before. I was reading and then I did a bit of studying it, and it sounds really prosaic, doesn't it? General intelligence. You kind of imagine the sort of half-wits that one meets regularly, just out and about.
General intelligence is lacking in humanity generally.
But general intelligence in this context is a very kind of, it's sort of one step before super intelligence, which I think what you were going to, because of course you're right, the combination of, they can mind meld minds in a way that eludes us, which would then lead to superintelligence. And you mentioned the timelines there. That's also mentioned in there. The race between those different US companies to get to that
Right.
point. The predictions from Anthropic's Dario Amodal, AGI by 26, 27. And Sam Altman says progress is fast enough that he could build an AI to replace himself as CEO. I won't comment on that last part, as anyone would tell the difference. But I think I'm getting a job there anytime soon, so no harm done. But yeah, so so this race is on. So it's not just, but it's not just the US companies, right? The other thing that they're racing against is China, where perhaps a little more opaque, and we perhaps don't know the main players there quite so well. But clearly, there's this race going on that sort of competing country level, which again, there are dangerous parallels that we can draw in a bit on that. Next thing in there, I mentioned earlier the human burnout. So it really talks about that as being something that's being expected and driven, that you're supposed to, that mission to get to that AGI is so fierce that they're expecting that leadership. DeepMind leadership describes an extremely intense culture where everyone is working all the time, no holidays, no time for the people they love, in quotation marks. I don't know why I quote that, but and no natural stopping point in the race. So, so again, when we talk about bring it back to maritime, we talked about, hours of work and rest, and what does that do to safety? A lot of those things clearly go out of the window. So that's somewhat concerning as well. Next one, physical and carbon footprint. 120 decibel screamer data centers that we hear about in there. In Santa Clara, a single room drawing the power of 60 houses. A Google site in Essex projected to emit the equivalent of 500 short-haul flights a week, plus mega facilities in Louisiana, Texas, India, all over, and even plans to put in space. We talked about those the other week. Now, on that one as well, there was also some stuff in the press. I don't know if you saw it in Australia, and some of the concerns about putting the infrastructure for these various data centers in Australia. The big thing being cited there, not just the kind of the amount of heat they emit, but the cooling, this requiring huge demands on water as well. So I got a whole bunch of facts on here, but I don't want to become that guy. But yeah, just those huge demands on water, maybe in areas as well where water is a little bit more scarce as well. And the one that I was reading about earlier in the beginning of the week there was actually putting housing at risk, like areas that needed to draw water for housing that were sort of endangered by plans for data centers in terms of just being able to produce water, which is clearly kind of, environmentally an issue. Now, we mentioned there around the VC pressure, and this is nearly 2 billion a week went into generative AI in 2025. Huge pressure to monetize fast. And you put that against the sort of social harms and all that sort of stuff, again, that's where governance gets under pressure. And I think when you look at if you look at social media, that tipping point in social media from when it went from, hey, it's benign, everyone's joining together, this is so democratic, what was the tipping point with when things started to kind of get ugly? And it was really when someone said, great, you've got all those users, we've spent all this money, we've bought all these shares, now how are you going to make money from them? And clearly, again, governance then under strain. The other thing is around some of these safety things, and this is where the governance becomes super important. And some of the things that it cites in the article there is the sort of misuse of AI, and it shouts, Anthropic reports Claude Code was used by Chinese state-linked group for the first largely autonomous at-scale cyber attack. So again, these are sort of real world applications for harmful purposes that we're seeing from AI. And that then leads us into this real thing that's talked about in there, the regulatory vacuum. There's a great quote in here. We're leaving these people to self-police fundamentally, which has worked so well on the social media front. Why wouldn't you just repeat it again with something much more dangerous? Real absence that they shot in there of any kind of laws in the US to create this. Joshua Bengio can plausibly say, I don't know who this guy is. Do you know who he is? Joshua Bengio. All right. We'll cut that bit out. A great quote in the article. from one of the guys working in this space who said a sandwich has more regulation than AI.
That's good. That's very good.
So what does that do? Even if you're one of the good guys, even if you want to put in the kinds of controls and measures that some of the voices, particularly some of those that were in AI from the beginning, who've been sort of calling for a bit more pace and caution to put those in, even if the companies wanted to do that, are they going to divert resources in that race that we talked about to get to the first AGI so that they can put in place safety checks when they think that no one else is doing it? And so therefore, what's the point of them doing that anyway? The other one as well, the other one that's in there as well is the age that it talks about in this. And it talks about the median age of the people working on the tech now has dropped to about 24. I think it was around about sort of early 30s. So you are asking and putting people into these positions under this sort of pressure and under some of these ethical dilemmas who have very little life experience, let's say. Sure, they're very talented at what they do, but it's a factor.
Have you heard of 996?
No.
So this is like the on the acceleration camp. This is like the workplace phenomenon coming out of China. And 996 is a work pattern. It's 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. And in technology circles in China, it has become like the default work pattern. It's a 72-hour week. And there's a growing number of companies in the States, particularly involved in artificial intelligence, but also other software areas, who are pushing and have adopted 996 in their own organizations, but are pushing for it to become a kind of cultural norm in the States that people in the technology world work 996. And the reason for that is because, exactly as you point out, there is this perception that there is a race going on for this new technology. And it's exactly the same. I can't remember who said this to me, and they may have even said it on the podcast, which is really bad if I don't remember who it is. So tell me if you've heard this before, but it was the reason that we put man on the moon had nothing to do with like shooting for the moon. It was because the Russians were trying to do it. And therefore the US had to beat them to it. And we're now in the same kind of situation where at a kind of high level, geopolitical level, you've got the US bloc and you've got the Chinese bloc.
Yeah.
And they are both gearing up to become technological superpowers. And it's really interesting. I hadn't made the connection that you've made between long working hours that we see in the maritime industry and safety, and then long working hours that we're now seeing in the technology industry and safety, ethics, all of those sorts of questions. Well, and on the demographics point, you're absolutely right. It is basically a bunch of 20-year-olds doing all this stuff.
And thank you for the compliment. And that is my USP, bringing disparate ideas together. But you mentioned it there, the polarized visions of the end game, right? So you've got all this, country of geniuses in a data center. What could be better? Think of all the things we can, cure every cancer within 10 years. And yet there's huge pressure and no force to come in and to try and regulate this. Even if you wanted to, it would be very, very hard. But there is no, there are no checks and balances going on there. And like I said, with these other elements that are going on there about working at pace, it's very hard not to knock things over. And we could be very, very close to seeing this outcome that nobody can really actively predict what it could be.
Oh, it's cheery today, isn't it?
You said you'd had a tough day, Nick, and I thought I wish I'd taken more notes, of something a bit jollier. Well, I was looking for a ray of sunshine to give you because I don't like to leave you on a negative, Nick. I know you like to look on the bright side. I thought at least this won't. We probably won't get to the climate crisis because this will probably end the world before the climate crisis.
Well, you say that, but while you were talking, I did some Googling to look into the power draw of artificial intelligence, right? And ironically, I Googled it and I got an AI generated answer from Google. So thank you, Gemini. Today, roughly 1.5% of global electricity goes to power artificial intelligence use. By 2030, it's forecast that will be 9% of total electricity consumption.
Yeah.
So it's going to go from 1.5% to 9%. And to put it into some kind of frame of reference, although these don't fully marry up, shipping accounts for 3% of global CO2 emissions. So all of the work that we're doing to decarbonize the shipping industry is going to be overtaken by AI power consumption unless we can find renewable ways to generate that significant growth of electricity demand.
Yeah.
So chuck that challenge back out to the industry, see if you can
Yes.
save us.
And this is the backdrop against the decarbonisation thing as well. That exactly that. There's often this misconception that we're looking to replace all the electricity we use now, and it's not, as you say. And this is just one of the drivers, but it's a significant one, and the numbers are staggering. You know, when you look at the power consumption that's envisaged. Now, let's talk about that though. The climate crisis. There is the same geopolitical tensions at work. But what do we see in maritime? We know that we need a global solution for this, and we know that we've got to arrive at measures together, which is why you and I have been so supportive of the work of IMO and are looking to try and find that kind of globalized solution. We need to do exactly the same thing with AI. So let's say, you mentioned there's nothing we can do about it. Luckily, still, it's being tested severely everywhere, it seems, but we do still live in democracies, and politicians can still feel pressure. And there are some very good points being made. We still have the power at the moment and the control at the moment to instill within these systems a maternal instinct, so that their overriding sort of desire is to protect us and to look after our interests. And this is really the great example. And I can't remember the guy's name. I really should know it, and it keeps falling out of my head. This analogy of I've mentioned this on the show before because I think it's such a great idea. There's only one example of an inferior being controlling a superior being in the whole of nature. And that's a child in its ability to control its mother. And for the mother, the superior being in this case, being more interested in the survival of the child than they are in themselves. And that's in our gift to give, all of us that are working within this. But it's going to only happen from international cooperation because of those different competing drivers.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was deep, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, don't anyone get too despondent, because I learned a new term today.
Okay.
I think if we're taking the optimistic view of what's possible, and to bring it down to the minutiae level of shipping, I just want to run a term by you that I thought was really cool. I actually learned this on the webinar about an hour ago. Have you ever heard of generative UI?
I haven't heard of generative UI. No.
You can probably guess.
Sounds like maybe something
going.
you'd pick up in a medical facility.
It's got a really bad case of generative UI.
Yeah. He's suffering from generative.
That's not a medical condition.
I'm afraid there's nothing we can do. Tell us, what is it? What is it?
It's using generative AI, generative artificial intelligence, but instead of applying it to a kind of a chat interface where the outcome is it's about using a chat interface to be able to generate new user interfaces for your software, kind of on the fly, right? Yeah. So assuming, let's just take the optimistic view that it's not going to kill us all or cook the climate so much that the world end up bending. In 3 to 5 years, we could be in a position where, if you take any shipping company, for example, you've got an ops team, you've got a chartering team, you've got a claims team, you've got an HSEQ team. They, roughly speaking, all need access to the same data or similar data, but they want to use it in various different ways. So instead of being in a position where everyone gets this kind of one piece of monolithic software, or which I think is a fate worse than death more often than not, you have to sit and configure these massive Power BI dashboards. You have a chat interface where you can type in, this is what I want to see on my screen. I want to see a dashboard that has these 4 charts, and I want to see a button that processes the data and all of this sort of stuff. And then instead of the output being a written response to you, the output is code, HTML, JavaScript, APIs that will then pull all of that data in and present it in the dashboard. And as your needs evolve as a user, you can update the user interface that you're working with as simply as being a user that types into the chat. So we could be in a situation where, there might be 500 employees in a shipping company. All of them would just have ever so slightly different UI setups that's entirely customized to their needs. And I just thought that was a really cool concept. Never heard it before in my life until today. And I really like it.
Well, this is very interesting because I actually it leads me into another topic that I wanted to discuss with you because I thought it might have come up a little bit this morning, and it comes back to the sort of shipping applications for this sort of technology as far as governance and stuff goes. Now, one of the things that we've talked about earlier, when you think about safety of jobs and things like that, one of the things that that I think is potentially, let's say it was a real growth, obvious job of the future, the sort of UX, UI kind of, because you'd
Mm.
think like the more and more software we adopt, the more and more, we talked about tech
Yeah,
stress.
yeah.
One of the ways out of that is UI. But for me, it was once we started to sort of look at agents and agentic AI, it was one of those areas that's kind of, you suddenly think, well, does this have the kind of, real impact that it used to have when you were in a situation where you don't really need to see any kind of an interface anyway, because you're just talking to an agent and the agent's kind of retrieving you stuff. So seeing a kind of an application that actually helps that world is really interesting. But as you describe it there, it takes me back to some work that I did, which kind of sadly didn't really go anywhere. I think it was a little bit too early, but it was all about like, what I was trying to do was I was trying to paint a picture. I did a presentation on Crew Connect about it, actually, which is probably still up online somewhere, where it was looking at learning, e-learning sort of angle training developed on the fly.
Okay,
And
that's cool.
and so where I was going with that was that sort of there are some really basic applications of it. One, the simplest one that I could think about telling you is when you produce a piece of e-learning, there's normally a vocal track which goes on there. And when I started in the old days, you'd have some sort of actor with a beautiful voice who would sort of come down. You'd go to you'd be in Soho, and you'd go down to a studio in Soho, and it was great. They'd bring you lunch and all that because it was like, you were spending a lot of money. And the actor would sit there and they'd sort of, warm up and that. And then they'd read sometimes for hours. Some of these courses could be really long. And I would sit in the booth, and that would be my afternoon kind of directing someone. And Brian Blessed would be in the next room reading out some advert for crisps or something. It was great. I digress. The point was you ended up with a WAV file, which later would be chopped up into lots of MP3s, and that would be your track. Now, the issue with that is obviously if you want to do additional language support and things like that, it becomes very, very tricky. Fast forward, and then you'd get this. We would work with these AI voices to see if they kind of got to the same quality as the actor. Never really. I mean, I'd moved out of doing that kind of thing before it had hit anything, but aware that colleagues who were working in that sphere sort of got there, particularly with American voices, and now I think you've got more British options as well. But still ending up with that sound file. The really cool bit is if you could get to a point where that vocal track is generated on the fly, because then when you just do a simple update, you send that update across, if we're still in that online offline shipping world, or just, doing it to the cloud, and in real time, it could change. And so the options then for putting it into different languages and stuff are fantastic. When you
Yeah, yeah.
update it, you don't have to get the actor back and hope his voice hasn't changed too much as we used to in the old days. Um, but then you start to think more imaginatively about it and say, well, if I'm doing it on the fly, then can't I personalize it? Can't I understand the way that person, and maybe I could think about the voice that I want to use because I know what they like, because I know the films they like. Maybe I can take that actor's, we talked about IP last week. God, there's an incredible coherence to what we do without any kind of plan. Must look into that. I don't know how we're doing that. Maybe we're AI. Who knows? But the point I'm getting to is that there's that's a really simple illustration of where you could maybe use a more informal language, and other people might like
Yeah, yeah.
more formal, and you could and then start to think about like personalization in other ways. You're watching a video of someone doing a job on board a ship. If the video is being generated on in AI, in real time, why not have your face on there? And I did all this in this presentation, showed some examples and stuff on there. So for me, when you're talking about like, I want to be at a prompt to say what I want the user interface to be, I'm almost thinking like, well, surely we get to a point where as it learns more and more about you, that it starts to present that, to you in different ways, which could be really, really interesting from the point of view of, like you said, when we talked about last week about like, don't I just really want a simplified ECDIS that doesn't,
Yeah, yeah.
these things could potentially grow in complexity with the needs that you have to open up different areas of an application. And that's where sort of, the UI and UX world could become fascinating in terms of like it not being like a single product that you're working towards or a modular product, but actually a kind of evolving experience depending on your preferences and your cognitive load and all those sorts of things.
Yeah, it was described by Alex on the webinar as a fabric. So rather than a product or rather than a single kind of software setup, it's like a fabric of different software tools that are entirely customized to your own preferences as an individual user. It just strikes me as interesting, taking what you're saying and kind of putting it into the longer term context of the industry, is that if you wind the clock back to the 10, 15 years ago, right, all maritime software was entirely custom built. Shipping company would go to dev shop would build the software for them, and that was it for that shipping company.
Yeah.
And then you go wind the clock back to 5 years, and everyone moved from custom build to now the SaaS model. Configure. Please don't ask for custom. We'll configure it to your setup.
Yeah.
And now I feel like we're moving from configure through to now this kind of custom world where it's not just customized to the organization, but like it effectively can be customized and recustomized over and over again for each individual user in the organization. And you end up with a potentially really exciting, but massively complex setup for the organization.
Yes. Well, there's a few things in there I think that are really different. And just to come back to that thing, just for people who perhaps haven't been through the archive or haven't been with us from the beginning, we did talk a little bit about that sort of that tension between own software, everyone moving to the SaaS-based product, and why that was a good idea. But then when we start to get into the bigger supply chain and linking up as data connections, start to work and to the specifics of people's commercial operations, that's when you start to then see that need creeping back in for like customization, because everybody's workflow when it comes to that is very, very different. And that's something that I'm becoming increasingly mindful of as I start working with clients to see in deeper level with their operations, having moved from being a sort of vendor to working directly with them. And it's really, and this is the real pinch point, because yes, from a software development point of view, that's not what you want. You want everybody on the same code branch moving forward and configurable items. But this is a really exciting idea. I think the thing that it starts to kind of concern me a little bit is when you start to think about like, well, how do I bring that software into my organization, and how do I kind of get that into my safety management system, and how my procedures manuals and my, and how do I do my inductions for my people with this software? Because if everyone's got a slightly different version and everyone's got a slightly different, even sort of heavily different configuration, but in a sense that problem already exists. And we got into a little bit of a discussion with that. I don't know if you were involved in that, but I was with someone the other day, and it was it was on someone responding. I was responding to something somebody put on YouTube on one of our discussions.
Okay.
Is this becoming exacerbated by the dropping of new features where they or UI updates? They'll in the old days, if you were getting would you like to move to version X, you'd install that somewhere off the main fragment. You'd see what was in there. You could plan, what do I need to update everyone with that's changing in this version? And you might not pick, might pick a time to do that change if it's a big change. If people just do these drops that they think are all very helpful, and you get a nice little thing that clicks you through what's changed or whatever, it really understates kind of how difficult that can be, particularly in a sort of environment that we're working in maritime, where if it is documented in the SMS, you've now just made that SMS out of date, potentially, if the change is big enough to the procedure and the way it works. So it kind of, I guess what I'm saying is, yes, it's a problem if everyone has this slightly different experience, but then we already have a problem now. So in the way that cloud is kind of changing the game. So maybe this just means we change the whole kind of paradigm to it. I don't know. The way we think about, I think the implication here is the way we think about UIs are different as well, in a way.
Yeah. And I think that point around risk is really important, right? It's annoying when, I have this all the time on HubSpot, like the menus move around on HubSpot, which is our CRM, and that's annoying. And, it might might marginally inconvenience me or a salesperson going about their day. If you release an update for a terminal operating system in a container yard, and there's something wrong with that update, potentially you're massively disrupting a multi-million-dollar an hour operation.
Yeah, good
And I
point.
know that so I was speaking to CIO of a container terminal fairly recently, and they were saying that anytime they do something like that, any kind of disruption they have to the operating system that they run, they have to basically manually go out and check the terminal, check where all of the equipment is, check everything is where the system thinks it is before they then press go to then start sending instructions out to all, because it's all automated terminal, sending all the instructions out to where everything should be. Because if you don't check it and things are in the wrong place, then everything's just going to start crashing into each other and all sorts of stuff. So it's genuine safety risk as well as business risk that comes when you bring it into that kind of software world, which is a long way from me being annoyed about HubSpot.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and at the risk of, potentially throwing another thing in there, which is just, but I think this is the episode to do it. So I'm inclined to bring it in, which is another thing another little rabbit hole that I went down, because you've heard the expression, we're educating our audience if they haven't. You've heard it, I know, because you mentioned it earlier, vibe coding, right?
Yeah,
Go on,
I'm a big
would you
vibe
like to give
coder.
us one of your wonderful
Do you want me to do
definitions?
an explainer?
Yes.
So it's kind of a concept that's gained popularity over, I guess, over social media over the last year or so, with the idea being that if you are a software developer of any description, you will need to learn a language. Software is coded in a language, and it is effectively taking the human language, or in this case, English, that we all speak, and converting it into a language that the machine can speak. So, if you wanted to code up a web page, it's HTML. If you wanted to code up some actions on the web page, it's JavaScript. If you wanted to do, server-side work, it could be, I see, I'm going to get all my frameworks
Python.
mixed up. Thank you, Python. The computer can speak that language, and if you're a software engineer, you learn to speak that language too, and read that language, and be able to literally type it into an IDE to program the system. Vibe coding is where a little piece of generative AI sits in the middle, and anyone can come along and in natural language type in a prompt of what you want the software to do, and the AI will take that, it will translate it in its head, and then it will just spit out the right code for your application. So in theory, and I put the in theory in bold there, in theory, anyone can become a software engineer as long as they speak English. That's the theory, at least.
Yes. And so, hugely democratizing. And because it means that people like me who don't have the patience to learn to code, but have lots of kind of things they want to bring forth into the world, can crack into it. Now there's, and it's lovely, right? It's amazing what it can do. Clearly, when coming back to the dystopian idea, it raises the bar on all sorts of things that people could create. The governance side of it's really becomes really, really important, I think, as well. Really, the real use case, I think, is for kind of rapid prototyping, for the kind of things where you really want to say, look, I've got this idea. You might use, something like Figma to do your designs that give people a real sense of what that software is going to look and feel like. So it's a really important part of it, something I believe in very, very strongly. And that sort of rapid prototyping is really, 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 really good. The concern with it, however, is that what you've got is, again, a bit like this essay looks like, or this report that my staff have generated for me looks like it has all the appearance of something that's really great and well researched and well thought through, and it's very confident and so on. But actually, the substance of it is really poor, and it's full of errors, and that as it comes past my desk and I kind of give it the sniff test, it looks really, really kosher, and I go, great job, guys, but actually it's not doing what I've been expected to do. And this is the risk with the coding that goes on through that as well. And this is one of the things that I think is everybody in maritime needs to get really savvy to, because you're not going to see it by looking at it. And it becomes, because it's a real risk, exactly as you were saying in the terminal scenario, but in all sorts of other scenarios as well, where we could be something that looks really robust, that looks like high-end software, but actually underneath it could be not, at best, it could be inefficiently sort of created, and at worst it could be, full of security holes and potentially kind of data breaches and all that sort of stuff. And I think that it's one of those things that because typically the quality of software you can get a sense for in how performative it is, because things wouldn't necessarily just not work well and be those are normally signs that that things are not great coding if it's taking a real long time and all that sort of stuff. um but there's a lot of that which is a bit of a problem with some of this stuff that's coming out from these no code, low code, vibe coded sort of things. So brilliant for prototyping, but you probably need to then go back and do some architectural work to get it to work as a piece of software. And again, I sort of had a little bit of a look to see how big is this, how much of stuff is going on now. And of course, looking at sort of what code is generated, what's done through AI support is not necessarily that kind of no code environment that you and I are talking about. There could be other things, but I think estimates that I could find, I'm not going to read a whole bunch of stuff out here, but you can do your own research, but sort of comfortably around 20-40% of code now involves AI generated code. And that adoption is super fast, because I don't remember even hearing about this till three years ago, maybe. The possibility, it started out with sort of using AI for testing. It then moved quite quickly into actually writing code, and it makes a lot of sense. I can see that in areas where it's high control, high touch, where you've got really quality people who can check the work, make sure the underlying architecture is correct. AI can probably write the code a lot better and a lot cleaner than a human being could. It could also reverse engineer a lot of code and put documentation where documentation is weak, that kind of thing. But where you have the governance in place, and those kind of companies that have invested in those key roles will really understand what's going on and what the machine's doing, versus people who might be perhaps a little bit more kind of scrappy, by nature, and doing really good stuff, really good innovative stuff. But from a shipping point of view, it's very, very important that we have that governance in place, that we don't expose ourselves.
You know me fairly well, so you know that I'm fairly scrappy in nature.
That's why we get on.
I'm a very enthusiastic Replit user, and Replit is like a vibe coding mecca. It's one of the kind of bigger vibe coding tools that exist. And for a kind of personal side project that I was working on a few months ago, was able to near enough go from like idea to full production. This thing worked, and it worked well within the space of like 2 or 3 days, and that would have been something previously that would have taken 2 or 3 weeks or even a few months. However, when it was running for a bit and then something wasn't quite working, I then went back and just wanted to switch something out. So I just want to switch out basically one data source for another. I kind of opened it up and looked at it. I was looking at the back end of it. I was like, I have absolutely no idea how this works. I could literally could be a foreign language to me. And I'm a bad. I did a web development boot camp 10 years ago. And if you're interested in entrepreneurship, generally there's 2 skills. One is learn to sell. The other is learn to code. And I think you'll probably do okay. And so I did those 2 things about 10 years ago. I know just about enough to be dangerous, but I can assure you the way Replit went about building this application just took it so far beyond my own expertise that I then became totally useless in terms of actually being able to manage it going forward. And I know I've read sort of anecdotally stories from genuine proper software engineers who've kind of said the same thing. It's like they just kind of let the system build it, and it's a miracle while it's happening. And then when you've actually got to go back and make it a bit more robust, make it a bit more scalable, the human who's at the wheel just doesn't understand enough of how it's put together to be able to even think properly about the architecture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's that point around what you just said there. It's about the architecture and the foundations that then allow you to then sort of move at speed. Typically, that's then what's going to differentiate how fast you can put new features in or rework sort of areas or put on this layer that you talked about, the AI layer. I think one of the things that's interesting, and maybe we'll come back to it another week, because I haven't got time and I'm not 100% sure that I'm confident with it, but I'm pretty sure that this is one of the things that Google thinks they're going to differentiate in the AI space, that they've actually spent a lot of their time not chasing after too much of the shiny stuff and being sort of keen to show up as readily as some of the other players. But what they've been doing is really focusing on the architecture to underline that. And I think they are actually racing ahead in quite a big way in terms of being able to leverage AI written code on this really good architecture. But what you said there is just, that's the scenario that's in my mind, you know, the likes of you and me who are kind of like, we've got a great idea and look at it, I found this piece of, you know, kit that can get us there. And then finding out that actually, like, oh Christ, this is completely unsupportable, all that sort of thing, which is why
Yeah.
you and I are not in the software business. We got other people for that stuff. But no, I think, you know, I think it all comes into this sort of governance space again, and where, you know, where I think that we perhaps could do a little bit more as an industry in terms of getting together and sharing, you know, sharing those kind of approaches to governance, and to kind of being able to sort of, you know, line test code and test, you know, understand what we're looking at and what's the maturity of it and all that sort of stuff.
Cool. I think have we got time for one more story?
Yeah, go on.
I've got one.
Better be jolly. It's been a bit
Yeah,
dark
it is. We're
this week.
gonna play a game. We're gonna play a game. Get ready for it. Okay. How's your Bruce Forsyth impression?
Oh, well, if anyone had seen good game, good game. I'm ready. Come on, dollies, do your dealing.
That's actually better than I thought.
Yeah.
For anyone
hero.
international who's never heard of Bruce Forsyth,
Yeah.
go and look him up. We're going to play a game. He used to host a show called Higher or Lower,
It's
and
called
last
a
week.
generation game, wasn't it? And it had
Oh, was it? I see.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
I don't
It's
think it
before
was
my
called Higher
time.
and Lower, but it had a bit in
Right.
it where they
Called Higher or Lower.
It might be right. But anyway, yeah, the game was called Higher and Lower. It was the
Thetius runs an IT cost and performance benchmarking club. So every year we have a group of ship owners who are our members come together. They submit us all of their IT budget spend data, and then we benchmark them basically and say, on a dollars per vessel per year basis, how much are you spending? And how much are you spending versus your peer group? How are you performing versus your peer group? All sorts of stuff like that. And obviously the full reporting with all the budgets and all that sort of stuff is only available to the members who join and who contribute data. But we can take some kind of limited extracts and insights from the report, and I can share them on this podcast here. So what I thought we could play is we could play a game of Higher or Lower on maritime IT budgets year on year. All right. So I'm going to give you a category of IT spend. I'm going to tell you how much of the overall IT pie it is, and I want you to tell me, do you think it's higher or lower this year than last year?
Well, then you need to do Bruce Forsyth. I'm the contestant.
That's the
How's
reason
your
I asked
Bruce
you for the
Forsyth?
impression. I don't do accents. I don't do impressions.
What's your? All right, fine. I'll kind of play both parts. I'll pretend that Bruce Forsyth.
I mean, you can do it as Bruce Forsyth if you like.
Game. Okay. So yeah. So again, you're going to just one more time. I was too busy thinking about what voice I was going to do.
So generally speaking,
yeah,
the overall spend remained
Yes.
flat year on year.
Yes.
But the categories have all shifted.
Oh, okay.
So I'm going to give you an IT spend category.
I see. Yes.
And I want you to tell me, is it higher or lower 2025 versus 2024? Let's start with an easy one. Satcom spend. Is it higher or lower? 2024 to 25. Correct.
Lower. Yeah.
In 2024, Satcoms made up 38.4% of the typical IT budget for a ship. It's now down to 37%. Small difference, but we've seen big shifts, not just among our client base, but across the industry, from VSAT being the primary, to now LeoSat near enough becoming the primary, with VSAT becoming a backup. But overall, spend is down. Next one, cybersecurity.
Oh, this would be like when you've been dealt a 7 or an 8, I reckon. You know what I mean? Like in the middle of the pack. Oh, it's fun. I'm going to go higher.
Correct.
Yay!
Correct. We've had the new unified rules from class E2027, and that has taken cybersecurity from about 3.5% of an IT budget to 3.9% of an IT budget. So not by much.
Yeah,
not by much. It was a close run play.
It's a difficult one, you know. This is it, because you go higher or lower in the cards, you see, ladies and gentlemen. That's how you play it. Anyway.
Specialist applications. So this is maritime specific applications. So things like your crewing software, your maritime ERP, plan maintenance system, HSEQ system, that sort of stuff.
That's quite a lot. That's quite a big category. That's a tough one. So what's in there? Tell me what's in there again.
Anything that's
PMS?
maritime specialist.
PMS.
Yeah, PMS,
planning,
crew training.
Planning, everything?
Yeah, HSEQ, yeah,
ACQ,
voyage compliance.
FMS.
It's your old one
My old world, then. I'm going to go lower then.
because you've left.
Yeah.
It's the impact you've had. You are correct, although it is slight. It's gone from 18.6 to 18.2%.
Oh,
of the
these are
typical
margins, aren't they?
Yeah.
Margins.
Yeah, yeah. They are.
How many are you going to ask me? Because I'm looking good at the moment.
I've got a couple more. So far, you are, what are you, 3 for 3? Staff and administration spend. So that is all IT team and subcontractors. Correct. The budget's come down, decreased by 1%. So it's gone from 16% to 15%.
Yep. Things are pretty tight out there. And this one what do I get if I get this one right? Do I get a free thesis report or something?
No, absolutely not.
I meant like a free copy, not like you're going to do one for me. That would be a great prize. You should do that. You should do a competition.
Well, if anyone wants to enter the competition, message me or something. And I'll come up with a competition and we'll give away a report. IT infrastructure. So that is things like hardware, onboard hardware, ashore, network infrastructure, all of that sort of stuff.
Does that also include data center spend?
It does.
Higher.
It's you got your first one wrong. It's actually lower. By some margin, I'm going to round these, but it's gone from 12% to 9%.
I felt like I could have come away looking good on that. So, the only thing I will say is that's bucked a trend from most of that is, that's for some of those very.
It covers the hardware elements, but I've got one more category for you.
All right.
This is the last one.
This for the mini fridge freezer.
Yeah, the speedboat.
This for the speedboat.
Non-specialist applications. So this is generic software applications that have no maritime specialism. So things like Office 365. But also software tools like automation tools, data warehousing tools, data lakes, all of that sort of stuff.
Oh, I thought that was all in the last category. That would be higher. Yeah.
That has gone. It's nearly 50% up. It's gone from 11.8% to 16.8%.
Well, that's what I thought was in the last one, you see. That's why I got that one wrong. Okay, but there you go. But yeah. Wow. But what was the jump then? What was the jump?
Near enough, I'll round them. It's gone from 12% to 17%.
Yeah.
So near enough, every other category, apart from cybersecurity, has had a bit shaved off
to pay for that.
All of that money has gone into non-specialist application. And there's a couple of things that are interesting about that for me. One is we've been saying for probably 18 months, 2 years now, that one of the big risks that the sort of specialist maritime software world faces is that as you bring Leo in, all of the USP around bandwidth constraint and all of that starts to go away. And then the question just becomes, I can just buy generic software that's best of breed enterprise software. And we know of a number of ship owners who've now moved all of their ERP over to Microsoft Dynamics instead of one of these specialist suppliers.
Well, let me throw something else into the mix there as well, just on that point. Lot of big software providers to industries more generally would have looked at the effort required to deal with the sort of, let's call it the sort of specifics of maritime and the constraints of maritime, and have gone, it's not worth it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. Well, now in that Leo world of where they don't have those constraints, will suddenly go, great, new vertical, plug straight in, no problem. So, that is something that that's been an existential threat on my radar for a very long time. And, it is a reality. I mean, looking at it from, we got two audiences, I suppose, haven't we, in the main, and there's, lots of other people around it. But typically, we're talking to a lot of ship owners, operators, those kind of things. They'll be rubbing their hands with glee that they suddenly got more optionality. And then our good friends who are working in the maritime technology space and have USB and stuff will have their work cut out, differentiating. So yeah, winners and losers as always.
But, well, you got 4 out of 6, which is not bad. And I think probably if I'd have been a bit more clear with you about definitions, you might have got a clean sweep. But such is life.
But hey, that's the way the cookie crumbles when you play your cards right.
Play your cards right.
Play your cards right. I played my cards right,
Someone
ladies
has
and
been
gentlemen.
screaming at us for the last 5-10 minutes that it's play your cards right and not higher or lower.
Yeah, Joe Pitcher, probably. Shout out to Joe Pitcher. Play your cards right.
I've got one quick and finally, because we're way over time,
Oh, blimey.
if you fancy it.
Yeah, go on then.
I won't take very long on this, but we talked last week about dynamic positioning, and I gave a very long-winded definition of what dynamic positioning is. But basically, it's a way to hold station in the ocean without any kind of anchor, just using an entirely new way of controlling the ships. This Monday, I found out, was the 50th birthday of dynamic positioning, and it was
Wow.
invented by Kongsberg in 1975.
Wow.
And they say they did a really, really good feature on the history of dynamic positioning, which we'll put in the show notes. It's well worth reading. It's absolutely fascinating. But without dynamic positioning in the offshore industry, offshore oil and gas would be exceptionally more dangerous. And consequently, the price for us to power our homes and all of that sort of stuff would be exceptionally higher. So happy birthday to dynamic positioning.
Yeah.
And that is proof that maritime was on the cutting edge of using computer-based algorithms to control ships 50 years ago. And yet we're all just still talking about autonomy as if it's brand new.
It was new, yeah. So happy birthday, a big happy birthday to dynamic positioning. And whose article is it?
Kongsberg. Who
Sorry.
invented it?
Yeah, it's Kongsberg's article.
Yeah. I'll stick it in the show notes.
Well done, Kongsberg, and happy birthday, DP, yeah.
Well, on that happy note, have a wonderful week, wherever you are in the world, and thank you very much for listening. Lovely to catch up as always, Raal.
Yeah, you too. All the best, everyone. Cheerio.